Cut the clutter takes you to China today, and if I may say so, a crisis-ridden China. China hit by several fresh crises. But remember, before I get deeper into this, it's not as if China is on fire. It's not as if China is burning, it's about to collapse. China is a very solid, powerful country with a very solid, powerful economy. So you don't come to the print for us to give you cheap thrills by saying, oh, look at China, they are collapsing. Look at Pakistan, they are collapsing. Look at America, they are collapsing. We are so fantastic. Of course, we are fantastic for our own reasons in India. But other countries, we should look at very factually and very clinically, particularly countries that are important to us, and even more so when these countries also happen to have, unfortunately, an adversarial relationship with us. Because then it's very easy to get your judgment to be colored. That's the reason I'm starting this with this detailed qualification. Now, China, a whole bunch of crises have broken out there. And these are the kinds of things you don't see in China. Say in India, in any democracy, in America, you had Black Lives Matter, you had other protests, you had Occupy Wall Street before that. In India, you had the farmers' protests. In India, there's a protest every day in every state. Some kind of protest of some kind of the other takes place. Just the other day, Regina Bihindukulu-Surya, who's our reporter right now in Colombo, she posted pictures of herself with her eyes bloodshot red with tear gas. So I did tweet on her tweet that, look, when we were growing up as reporters, our old stodgy news editors always said nobody ever became a reporter without tasting tear gas, right? But this is India, other democracies where these things happen. When in China these things happen, that becomes a bigger story. So that's what's happening in China. So we've seen it happening particularly in two provinces of China. Look at the map of China. So this is the province of Henan, which is sort of north-central China. It's landlocked. It's not one of China's largest provinces, but remember, it's not that far from the Chinese seaboard. So this is still close to the boom zones of China. And then next to that also is the Liaoning region, which is a kind of rust belt of China, because that's when rust belt is usually an expression you use for regions where iron ore comes out or where steel industry is located. So Liaoning is called the Rust Belt of China. There's another province next to Henan, which is Anhui. Now what's happened in these provinces is that thousands of people have come out protesting. Literally, thousands of people have come out protesting. And what are they complaining about? They are saying that banks where we deposited our money, they are not returning our money. So banks are defaulting on their deposits. So you would imagine that a country with a solid, strong economy like China, with a per capita GDP more than 5 times, average Chinese citizen earns 5 times as much as the average Indian. In fact, more than 5 times as much as the average Indian. And it's also an authoritarian regime, very strong government, party-run government, or government and party work together. There you might not imagine banks defaulting on people's deposits. But in this case, a large number of banks have done it. Now, in this province, in the province of Henan, for example, 4 important rural banks have defaulted on people's deposits. Now, what are rural banks? Once again, once you start looking at other countries more closely, you begin to see similarities. Now, China has a lot of banks. India also has a lot of banks. Now, you might say, how does India have a lot of banks? There are 20 odd nationalized banks. And there are a few private sector banks that, ICICI, HDFC, Axis Bank, Yes Bank, such as it is, right? Etc. RBL Bank. How many banks are there? But the fact is, if you start counting the cooperative banks, the rural banks, then it will become a lot of banks. So China has 4,398 banks. And I have a statement here from the Stability Bureau Chief of the Chinese PBOC, which is the Central Bank of China, People's Bank of China, who says that we have carried out stress tests on 24 of these banks, 24 out of 4,398 banks, and we found them to be completely safe. But we've also found that 316 banks are are unstable, they look risky, but they amount to only 1% of the assets in our system. Now that's what the PBOC Stability Bureau chairman is saying. Now what happens if you are a depositor whose money is stuck in one of these banks? So here are the 4 banks which are supposedly defaulted in Henan province. These banks are Yuzhou Shinminsheng Village Bank, Shanghai, not Shanghai, Shanghai Huanghai Community Bank, New Oriental Country Bank of Kaifeng. So these 4 banks have now frozen the deposits of depositors. Now what is the parallel with India? Parallel with India is the cooperative banks. Now I'll take you back to a story. Right now, because we've just seen the election of a new president. So before the last president, say in 2008, when Congress party put Pratibha Patil as its candidate, I used to be the editor of Indian Express, and we were doing a series of stories on a lot of funny businesses that she and her family had been involved in. These businesses were about a cooperative bank, private college, a sugar mill, etc., etc. So there was a lot of pressure from the Congress party to stop doing these stories. In fact, senior members of the Congress party came calling to my home with a basket of Langda mangoes, so you can't say no to mangoes. There was nothing else but mangoes. And they said, look, whatever happens on 25th of July, she will represent the glory of the Republic. So why are you embarrassing her now? And why are you embarrassing the Republic? But I said, these are genuine stories, they must be carried. The answer was something that surprised me, and that has stayed with me, and it came back today, and you will understand why. They said, what has she done wrong? 3 businesses that you're complaining about. One is a cooperative bank, one is a sugar mill, one is an educational institution. You can name for us one politician in Maharashtra who is not involved in these businesses. Now, I'm sure you figured out the connection. The same thing applies in Chinese small towns, provinces, rural China as well. That is local politicians, which is the local unit of Communist Party. They have companies own banks, companies own industries. So these banks are seen to be linked to local politicians, albeit all of one party. In India, it can be many parties, all of one party. So people are angry. People think that these banks or these failed banks also have political protection, and that is what causes further complication. Now, these people who were protesting, videos have come out. They've been beaten up by local police. They've also been beaten up by people in white shirts, which may be party workers for all I know. We can't say for sure, but these are things that you're not used to seeing in China often. And because of their pressure, what's happened is that local authorities, because they want to buy peace at any cost right now. Remember, this is a difficult year for China, challenging year for Xi Jinping, because later this year is the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. And that is where he is trying, or he is hoping, in fact, right now globally it's seen as inevitable. He is expecting to get his 3rd term, which doesn't happen in China. He changed the rules. See, this is what happens if you're playing the game. You're also the umpire. You can change, and you're also the board of cricket control. You can always change the rules. You might say it's no longer cricket, but the fact is you make the rules and you can make sure that you always win. So he has set it all up and he's expecting to win. But going up to there, he does not want any complications. Now, this kind of a complication, if these public protests spread, if it becomes a contagion, that may lead to instability in the run-up to the party congress later this year. So he doesn't want it. So local party officials have also got involved, and they've now said that they will refund up to 50,000 yuan equivalent to every depositor. 50,000 yuan at this point in rupee terms will be about 6 lakh rupees. Now, people might have larger deposits than that, but this is at least to say that this much is covered. Now, there is one more little twist there. Now, you might ask me, since I'm sure each one of us is a depositor in India, we have a bank account, that bank accounts in India, bank deposits are insured up to a limit, and there is a demand to up the limit. So what is the limit in China? The limit in China is actually quite high. The limit in China of insurance is 500,000 yuan. If the insurance is up to 500,000 yuan, how come these deposits are not all covered under that insurance? And that is where the twist lies. Because it does seem that in many of these cases, People have deposited money in the banks, but the banks have not put these in deposits. So banks instead have further deposited them in online lending systems whereby they can get a higher interest rate. So in China, interest rates are much lower than India. So if you go to a proper bank in China, maybe you will get 2.75%. These rural banks, equivalent of cooperative banks in India, they are giving up to 4.75%. From where do they produce that additional money? Because they in turn lend this money to this online borrowing and lending platforms, which give you high interest, and higher the interest, more the risk. So these banks have apparently taken depositors' money in trust, but further played a risky game of it with it, hoping to pay a higher interest rate and to make higher profits. And that is where this money is probably disappearing. So this has spread to the adjoining Anhui province also. Now, how does this work in China? So in China, these local governments, which are essentially party governments or units of the party, they have local entities called LGFVs. LGFV stands for Local Government Financial Vehicle. So local government has all this money. So these become like a bit like venture funds. So they invest in companies, factories. They in turn generate capital, and then they set up banks, or then they invest in banks. So people don't make a distinction between the party, the local government, the companies they run, and the bank. And that's why this problem gets more complicated. Now, if this was the only problem, this would not look so bad. You might say that this is only 2 provinces, hasn't spread. But something else has happened elsewhere. Now, if you look at this report from Bloomberg, I will show you the cover picture on the screen, but I will share a link with you. You can read there. This Bloomberg report is by Rebecca Chung Wilkins, who I follow regularly. This report says that in 301 projects, real estate projects, 301 projects in 91 cities, borrowers who've taken mortgage, you book a flat, right? Amrapali, Supertech, and I'm sure there are similar ones. I'm only talking about 2 which are next to Delhi, and I see those headlines often. But I'm sure many other projects have gone wrong. There's DB Realty around Mumbai. Lots of projects have gone wrong. So those people who paid money for these apartments in these projects, which are now delayed, apartments are not delivered, people have borrowed the money, they are paying interest, they are paying their EMIs, they are now refusing to repay their lenders. They are refusing to pay their EMIs or EMI equivalent, whatever it's called in China. Why? Because they are saying these fraudsters took our money, they promised to deliver the flat by such and such date, and it hasn't happened. Now, real estate in China is a very large part of Chinese economy. It's about 20 to 25% of Chinese economy. That's a very heavy weightage, because all of China has been building, constructing, urbanizing. And to have a home, just as in India, is a big dream of any family. So this may be 20 to 25% of national economy in China, but it's also almost like 70% value of the total assets of many families, in fact, most middle class families in China. And families usually pull in all their money to buy that one house. And that one house is now stuck, whereas loans are sitting. So these families are saying, we are not repaying our loans. Now that's caused a big problem. Now, Xi Jinping does not want this spreading out of control. At the same time, if he now says, all right, stop paying, and there'll be no penalties, no nothing, interest will be frozen until these people deliver. First of all, these people can't deliver, because chances are either they had overcommitted, or they had sold too cheap, or they have stolen the money, which is the simplest possibility. See how Supreme Court has moved into the case of Amrapali and Supertech. So this is almost like 400 Amrapalis and Supertechs, and this is just the beginning. Now, if the government says don't repay your loans, there is a moral hazard, because that destroys your credit culture. Then everybody says, if so and so is not repaying their loans, why should I repay my loans? So that is a problem. At the same time, there's a crisis in the larger economy, because contractors who are building these projects, they are complaining. They are saying, we can't repay our loans and we can't pay salaries to our staffs, because developers are not paying us. So developers are not paying contractors who are not paying their staff, and they are suppliers, and developers can't pay because those who bought apartments are not repaying their loans. So this way, the entire system is facing trouble. So once again, if I read international media, they say that on the Chinese social media, online Chinese discussion groups, there is a lot of sharing again of that anthem, pro-democracy anthem from that French play based on Victor Hugo's famous 19th century novel, Les Miserables, or may try and get it as close to French as possible, although I struggle with English itself, so I don't know how much better my French would be, but Les Miserables, right? So the song there is, the English version, the song is, Do You Hear the People Sing? Now this began to spread when Shanghai was in deep crisis with that really draconian lockdown. And that is the further problem with China right now, because Xi Jinping has also followed a zero COVID policy, and he wants to go with the zero COVID policy until his Communist Party People's Congress, where he will get his third term. As a result of which, Chinese economy, which was supposed to recover big time this year, has slowed down. So first quarter, Chinese economy grew 4.8%. Chinese year is Jan 1 to December 31. First quarter, it grew by 4.8%. Wasn't too bad. It was estimated that year by year growth for the year would be upwards of 5.5%. But second quarter, the growth is just 0.4%. So that is another area where crisis is coming up. Now, you want to read more about it, you want to get a better sense of it, you see this series of 10 tweets put out by fine Bloomberg journalist Sofia Horta Costa, who also I follow, and she tells you that these are the 10 things that happened. See the 10 tweets, it's a thread. 10 things that happened in China in the last 7 days, and that's very interesting because she talks about growth rates falling, she talks about mortgage payments slowdown, she talks about Henan protests, she also talks about bank stocks falling. Bank stocks in China, she said, had their worst week since 2018, which is saying something. Budget deficit in all provinces is going up because they're spending a lot more on relief and on shoring up the economy because of this zero COVID policy and repeated lockdowns. And you know what? There are other indicators. Iron ore prices, for example, futures fell by 8% in just one day because that price is linked to how much will China construct, how much will China produce for the world, because steel goes into everything. And finally, the Chinese government now is debating seriously, very seriously, the possibility that they should lift the ban on import of coal from Australia. That had happened in 2020 when relations between two countries became really bad, and they imposed tit-for-tat sanctions. So once again, last year, in the fall, China had a coal crisis. Now they are worrying. So remember that fall situation or late fall will pretty much coincide with the People's Congress, which is so important for Xi Jinping. So this is just a quick inventory of a plethora of crises which have now hit Xi Jinping in what is a very crucial 6 months for him.